Again, I'm back. That didn't take very long. For those that are new here, you picked a really good time to be here. We are right in the middle of a series that we are simply calling This Is Church. And this whole idea of this series is kind of built around this idea of church culture. And the thing that we have said over and over is that culture is that thing that makes you do the things that you do. Culture it's what makes you make the decisions you make. It shapes your decisions in the future. And every organization has a culture. Church is no different. Churches have a culture as well. And the reason we're doing this entire series is because we have always said that our main goal at Christ Community Church is to glorify God in all things. That is our ultimate goal at the core of everything we do, whether it's the songs we sing, whether it's the message we deliver, whether it's the work we do in the community, the volunteerism, everything that we do is built on this idea of glorifying God in all things. And what churches do over time is they take their primary goal and then they begin to build culture around that goal. And so what we're doing in this series is we want to be very intentional with the things that we are going to use to shape our culture and shape who we are. So if you have missed any of them, I would encourage you, go back and watch any of the last 3 weeks that we have done messages. But this whole series is built around this idea of the culture that we have in church. And so this morning, we're going to continue that message. Today, we're going to be talking about a different aspect of culture. It's going to hit home a little different for most of us. And it's this idea of being a church that has a culture of forgiveness. We're going to spend today talking about this idea of a culture of forgiveness. So if you've got your Bibles, I hope you do, go ahead and flip over to Matthew 18. That's where we're going to spend most of our time this morning in our passages. Now, when we're talking about forgiveness, I don't know if you've ever thought of this, but as the church, as Christians, as believers, we're all recipients of God's grace. Like for those of us that have surrendered our life to Christ, whether you think about it or not, we are all recipients of God's grace. And God's grace actually includes forgiveness. Like we are forgiven because we have surrendered our life to Christ. And because of that, he has poured out grace and forgiveness on us as well. But it doesn't just end with us. Like we're not the terminal thing where it stops, that we are actually called to be conduits for God's grace. That when God pours his grace on us and in us, it should work through us into our horizontal relationships with other people. And that also includes forgiveness, not just grace. In other words, another way of thinking of it is like this: forgiven people forgive people. Like as people who are forgiven, we have been forgiven by God, we are now called to forgive other people. And so let me just give you this caveat before we get started this morning. We're going to kind of wade into the shallow end of this conversation about forgiveness this morning, and it's going to be fun. We're going to have a good time with it. But then towards the end of this we're going to jump into the deep end. And when we start jumping into the deep end, we're going to have some very practical things for you. We're going to have a little bit of homework, some things that you can do this week, and it's not going to be as much fun. It's not. In fact, it's going to make some of you very uncomfortable. But I think if we take the words of Jesus very seriously, and we take the commands of Jesus very seriously, we owe it to ourselves and to our faith to follow through and do the things that he's asking us to do, no matter how uncomfortable or how challenging it might be. Now, we talk a lot here about sin and about how we should respond when we have sinned against other people. You hear that all the time. We talk about how we are called to respond to our own sin. But the one thing we don't do a lot of is we don't talk about what do we do when we are on the receiving end of sin. You know what I'm saying? Like when someone else has sinned against us, how do we appropriately respond to that? And see, what we see is that the Bible actually has a lot to say about this. The reality is, whether you realize it or not, you will, if you haven't already, you will at some point in your life be sinned against because of someone else. You understand that, right? Like we're all sinners. Like the guy standing up here leading this church is a sinner. You're being led by a sinner. In fact, here's what I want you to do this morning. I want you to look to the person on your left and say, sinner. Okay? Now look to the person on your right. Say, sinner. Right, because we're all sinners. No one is immune to sin. We have all sinned. And because of that, everybody is going to be sinned against at some point. And like I said, the Bible actually has a lot to say about this idea of forgiveness. And 2 points up front, let me just say this. Forgiveness is a command by God. It's not a suggestion. We are commanded by God to forgive others. And I am convinced that the majority of tension and struggles and conflict that we see, especially within the church, result from people who treat this as a suggestion, not as a command. We have to understand that forgiveness is commanded by God. The other thing about forgiveness is this. Forgiveness is a unilateral decision. Here's what I mean by that. Our ability to forgive or our willingness to forgive is not predicated on someone else's contrition. It's not like this person feels sorry or they're like, oh, I apologize. We don't withhold forgiveness until the other person comes to us and says, oh, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. That's not what this is about. This is a unilateral command that we are given. It's a unilateral decision that we are called to forgive other people. And I get it. That is difficult. We struggle with that, right? We struggle to let go of that. C.S. Lewis says it like this. He's got this quote. He says, everyone thinks forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive. And look, we have all these reasons why we choose not to forgive, reasons why we withhold forgiveness for those around us. And let me just hit a few of them. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just a few of the big ones that I see and what I do. And the first one is this. The reason we don't forgive is because we don't truly understand the nature of forgiveness. Like we don't really understand. Like we somehow conflate forgiveness with our feelings. Like we think that they're the same thing, but our feelings and forgiveness are two different things. Forgiveness, like I said, it's an action step that we are commanded by God to do. It's what we are called to do. Our feelings are actually a gift from God. He gives us our feelings and our emotions in order to navigate this thing that we call life. And don't get me wrong, our feelings are a good gauge for what's happening in our life. It's a good temperature gauge, but it should never be a guide for our life because our feelings oftentimes will betray us. They ebb and flow with the circumstances of our life sometimes. So it's not that. Let me show you how the enemy will use your feelings against you. You've got a person that you feel like you have forgiven. You have made the decision, I'm going to forgive that person. So a month goes by, 6 months goes by, a year. You don't even see this person, and you have completely put that whole situation out of your mind. And then you're scrolling through Facebook, and their profile pops up. Or you're out to dinner at the restaurant, and the person walks in the door, and you see them. And then all of a sudden, all of these negative emotions that you thought you had suppressed and pushed way down start bubbling back up to the surface. And see, the enemy, he'll get in your ear and he'll start whispering to you and he'll say, yeah, see all these negative feelings that you got? That shows that you really didn't forgive that person. The enemy will use your feelings to make you doubt whether or not you've actually forgiven the person. Because he knows if he can convince you that you need to doubt whether or not you've forgiven someone for that single offense, what he will do is he will then deconstruct your ability to think and believe that God has forgiven you. You're like, if I can't even forgive this person of this one thing, how in the world could a loving God actually forgive me of all my sin? So we have to have a right understanding and a true understanding of the nature of forgiveness. Second thing is this. Another reason that we choose not to forgive is we refuse to acknowledge the hurt and the pain and the betrayal that's associated with forgiveness. Like we have this tendency to want to kind of like either minimize it, trivialize it, kind of push it down. We want to like push it aside. We ignore it. We like just try to suppress it as best we can. But here's the problem with that. God's grace never calls us to ignore our pain. He doesn't. Like he doesn't call us to ignore when sin has been perpetrated against us. We're not supposed to just pretend like that thing didn't happen. That's not what forgiveness is. See, sin is a really, really, really big deal. You understand that, right? Like sin is such a big deal that Jesus had to go to the cross and die for it. He died for the sins of all people. And if you were the only person in this world and you had sinned and you had that one sin, he would still go to the cross and die for your one sin. So we have to understand that we can't just ignore the sin in our lives. And here's what happens when we tend to want to minimize or ignore the sin that has been perpetrated against us. Ultimately, what we're saying is that we are going to minimize the work of Jesus on the cross. So we have to make sure we don't just refuse to acknowledge or try to ignore the sin that's been perpetrated against us. We have to acknowledge it, and we have to recognize it and lean into it. Third thing I've got is this. We have a tendency to confuse forgiveness with reconciliation. Like these are two completely different things. They often get lumped together, but these are two different things. Forgiveness, remember, is a unilateral command. You are commanded to forgive other people unilaterally, not dependent on anything that they do or say. But reconciliation is about pursuing a relationship. It's about pursuit. And here's the thing about reconciliation. It requires two parties. Both parties have to be willing. If there's a problem, two parties have to be willing to work together to reconcile over whatever the thing is, the conflict is that's existing. And it requires confession and it requires repentance on both parties. And here's the thing. Some relationships shouldn't be reconciled. I'm just going to be honest with you. Like, there are going to be people here that have walked out of abusive relationships, that have walked out of, like, really toxic relationships. And God does not call you to step back into those painful relationships. In fact, you probably shouldn't be reconciled with that person. Should you forgive them? Absolutely. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be reconciled with them. So let's go ahead and jump in our passage. We're in Matthew chapter 18. I've given you like 6 minutes to find it. Hopefully you got there. We're going to be looking at verses 15 through 35 this morning. And this is Jesus teaching, and he's going to give a parable. And it's all about both how and why we are called to forgive. So there's going to be some teaching aspect of this, and then there's going to be some practical aspects of this at the end. But let's jump into what Jesus says, starting with verse 15. He says, if your brother sins against you. Now, this is a powerful statement. We could spend the entire sermon on this one verse. He starts it off and says, if your brother sins against you. He very easily could have said when, because remember what we said, we're all sinners. You're going to get sinned against. He could have easily said when. But there are 3 questions that I want you to think about anytime we think that applies to forgiveness here that flow out of this. There's 3 questions we have to ask ourselves. And the first one is this: is this my brother? Because he says, if your brother sins against you. So in other words, is this your brother or sister in Christ? Is this person a believer? Are they someone who has surrendered their life to Christ? Are they a Christian? Because if not, do we still forgive them? Absolutely. We're still called to forgive them even if they're not Christians. But the conversation we have changes. Our first and primary conversation with someone who is not a believer isn't about healing the relationship that we have. It's about helping them heal the relationship that's broken that they have with God. Your first conversation has to be a gospel conversation with that person. You have to be willing to sit down and share with them how they can experience forgiveness from God the same way that we have. And then once we've done that, then you can address your situation. You can address the hurt and the pain in your situation. But your first conversation, if this person is not a believer, is have they received the forgiveness that God offers? And I don't know why we do this in the South. This Bible Belt is notorious for this. We tend to want to treat non-believers like believers. We tend to want to hold them to the same standards that they have not subscribed to. But we can't do that. So we have to start with the gospel. Second question is this. It says, if your brother sins. So here's the question. Has your brother actually sinned against you? That's the question we have to ask. And look, I have looked all through the book of Proverbs. I've looked through all the wisdom literature in the Bible, and I have tried my best to find a verse that says, if you get on my nerves, that's a sin. But it's not there. Like, believe me, I wish it was. It would make my life so much easier. But it's not in there. So what we have to understand, what we have to ask ourselves is, has this person actually broken a precept of God, a command of God, and sinned against you? Or have they just kind of ruffled up your preferences a little bit? Because that's not sin. Like when your person rubs up against you, that's not sin. And so we have to understand the difference between God's precepts and our personal preferences. This, oh, by the way, is exactly why we encourage you to spend time in your Bible. You have to be biblically literate. If you're going to know the actual precepts of God, you have to spend time in his written word. And so we're going to encourage you to continue to do that. And the third question is this. It says, if your brother sins against you. So the question is this offense, is this sin against you? Because we do not get to be a spokesperson on behalf of someone else. You understand that, right? Like the sin has to be perpetrated against you. And I get it. That's difficult. That's challenging because I'm going to be honest with you. If you sin against me, if you have done some wrong against me, I'm usually going to be pretty quick to get to the forgiveness thing, right? And I'm going to forgive you and get past it fairly quickly. But man, let me tell you, if you hurt my family, like you hurt my wife or my children, dude, it's game on. I'm going to be honest with you. Like I have told you guys this before, I have no problem doing prison ministry from the inside. So I am very quick to withhold forgiveness on behalf of someone else that you have wronged. And I think a lot of us are like that. When our loved ones get hurt by someone, we have a tendency to want to withhold forgiveness from that person, but we don't get to do that. That's not what the Bible tells us. We don't get to forgive or withhold forgiveness on behalf of someone else. So those are the three questions we have to ask ourselves. Is this person a Christian? Have they actually sinned against me? And was it against me and not someone else? And if those three criteria are met, here's what you have to do. Here's what Jesus tells us you have to do. And look, if we could do this next part, if our churches, our communities could just follow through on this next part, dude, it would change the world. You guys ready for it? Here's what he says. He says, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. It's crazy, right? It's revolutionary. The audacity of Jesus to tell us to go and just talk to people. Not talk about people, not talk around people, not text them, not Facebook them, not talk about them, but talk to people. Look, I get people that come to me for counseling all the time because they're having a problem with someone else in their life. And it never goes well. I'm just going to tell you, like I'm not the person to come for counseling. I really not, because I don't do it that well. Here's what I'm going to do. When you come to me for counseling and you're telling me about a problem you have with someone else, the first question I'm going to ask you is, well, have you talked to that person? And you'd be surprised how many times the answer is no. Their attitude's like, well, I just figured, Michael, I would tell you and you would tell God, and then God would go get them. But that's not how it works. That's not how forgiveness works. So we have to be willing to talk to people. We have to be willing to have conversations. Jesus goes on, he says this, if he listens to you, you have gained your brother. Look, I am completely convinced that all of the potential conflict, the majority of it, could be resolved by simply doing this one thing, if we would just talk to people. Now sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes it takes a little more than that. You have that conversation with a person, but it takes a little more. So Jesus is going to keep going. In verse 16, he says, but if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Here's what Jesus isn't saying. He's not saying that you grab 2 or 3 people because it's an intervention. That's not what he's saying. This isn't like in high school when we used to get in, in homeroom, you get into that brush up with someone in homeroom, and then what do all day? You spend all day trying to get all your buddies on your side, and they're trying to get all their buddies on their side, because at the end of the day, it's whoever has the most people on their side, and we start forming cliques. That's not what he's saying here. He's not telling you to go grab some people to kind of bully the other person. He's saying you need to find some objective, third-party, trusted Christians who are willing to come alongside you and this other person to help resolve the conflict. You need to find someone who is a trusted, godly person who's willing to come alongside you and help identify any blind spots that either that person or you have in your life because of this situation. And these people need to be more concerned about reconciliation and unity than your feelings. Do not grab someone who's just going to take your side regardless of what information comes out of that conversation. This is also why we encourage you guys to be in either discipleship groups or life groups. You need to have a group, a band of brothers that can come alongside you, that can not only help you in bad situations, but also help hold you accountable when you need to be held accountable. So Jesus is going to keep going. Verse 17, he says, if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. Now, what it's not saying is go tell the church service. That's not what this is about. You don't air dirty laundry in front of everybody. That's not what this is saying. It's not. That'd be like, okay, at the end of the service, Spencer, you're going to come up and sing one more song. All you sinners line up over here. We're going to start airing out all of your stuff. That's not what this is about. But I can tell you, I have been in churches who will take this verse and try to use it to publicly admonish someone. That's not what this is saying. It's not about publicly admonishing anyone. What it's telling you to do is go find yourself some church leaders. Go find yourself some pastors, some elders, some people who are in some kind of spiritual authority to help you work through and find some resolution for this conflict that has arisen. And then he says this, he says, and if he refuses to listen, even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Now, historically, the church has used this to try to kick people out. They're like, yeah, see, he's unrepentant heart. We're going to kick him out of the church. That is not what's happening here. That's exactly how the Pharisees would have handled this situation. That's exactly how the Pharisees would have treated tax collectors and Gentiles. But that is not what we're called to do. We are called to treat them the way Jesus would have treated them. So how did Jesus treat Gentiles and tax collectors? He loved them. Yeah, did he put them in leadership positions in the church? No, absolutely not. But you know what he didn't do? He didn't withhold the grace and forgiveness that he offers you and me. The same grace and forgiveness that we have access to, they still have access to. And we as the church have the opportunity to love them into the kingdom of God. And that's what he's calling us to do, to just love them. Verse 18 says, truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. In other words, he's saying that reconciling our horizontal relationships with other people has eternal significance. That our horizontal relationships mean that much to God. Now, these next two verses are probably two of the most taken out of context verses that we have in the Bible. So let's walk through these. Verse 19 says, again, I say to you, if two of you agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. Prosperity gospel guys, man, they love this. They love to hang on to language like this. But this verse is not about praying for a new Cadillac or praying for a new boat or a truck. That's not what he's saying. This verse is about reconciliation. It's about praying for reconciliation. Verse 20 says, for where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I among them. Now again, this is not a worship verse. As much as we like to use it for that, this is not a worship verse. This isn't about, we're going to come together and hold hands and sing Kumbaya and Jesus is going to show up because there's at least two of us here. That's not what this is about. This is about reconciliation. Saying that horizontal relationships are so important to God that when two or more are gathered together under the banner of forgiveness and reconciliation, that God will show up right in the middle in a very, very powerful way. That's what this verse is talking about. All right, so verse 21, Peter's going to jump into the conversation. Why? Because he's Peter, and anytime there's 5 seconds of silence, he's going to open his mouth, right? That's what Peter does. So Peter's going to jump in, and he says, then Peter came up, and it said to him, Lord, how often will my brothers sin against me, and I forgive them? As many as 7 times? Notice Peter's question here. He doesn't say, how often, when I sin against other people? He says, hey, I get sinned against all the time, Jesus. You probably know that. Like people sin against me all the time. How often am I supposed to forgive that person? Up to 7 times? And you got to understand, Peter's kind of showing out here. See, 7 is the number of completion in the Bible. And what he's doing is he's actually kind of showing off a little bit. Because what you don't understand is that forgiveness was not an Old Testament value. It wasn't. Forgiveness in the Old Testament, do you remember the whole eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing? See, when the Israelites were brought out of captivity from the Egyptians, they had been in slavery for 400 years. They had never governed themselves. They had never learned to cohabitate with themselves, and they had all of this weird setups. So, like if you were to poke me in the eye, I'd kill you. You steal my goat, I kill you. You insult my wife, I kill you. And so what God is actually bringing to them is this idea of equal justice. Like, you don't just kill someone because they stole your goat. He's saying, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And so it's all about justice. And what Peter's doing, because he knows this, and when he grabs onto that number of completion, that number 7, he's essentially trying to be a super Christian. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's got the big C on his chest. He's got the cape like fluttering in the background. He's trying to puff himself up. But Jesus sees that. Verse 22, he says, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Now, I preach out of the ESV Bible, and it says 77 times. Other translations will say 7 times 70, which is like 490 times. But in the Greek, if you dig into the Greek, what it actually says is 7 and 70. But that's not the point. Let's not get fixated on a number here, because what Jesus is doing when he offers up this number, he's essentially using hyperbolic language. What he's doing is he says, I want you to take the number of completion, and I want you to multiply it by the number of completion plus a 0. In other words, he's saying, dude, that number might as well be a bazillion. Like, it's infinity. You don't stop. Basically, what he's doing, he's looking at Peter, and he's like, hey, Peter, how many times have I forgiven you? And Peter's like, 1, 2, a lot? Yeah. So that's what I want you to do too. He's saying you need to go and forgive people like that. And then Jesus is going to drive home his teaching with a parable. So in verse 23, he says, therefore the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. I want you to underline that phrase, settle accounts. Because forgiveness was actually a legal term. It was actually a financial and legal term. It was all about settling accounts. That's what forgiveness was tied to. He keeps going, verse 24, he says, when he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. I want you to underline that phrase, owed him. See, owed him, that's what our sin does. When we have sin that's perpetrated against someone, we create a debt-debtor relationship. That's what sin does for us. That the person who has sinned now owes the person who's been sinned against something. And we all get this, right? Because what do we say? Anytime someone says something that insults us or offends us, you owe me an apology. That's how we treat this, right? And that's what he's saying in this verse, is that you owe something. Now, he says the word 10,000 talents. A talent would have been the equivalent of 20 years of wages. So when he says 10,000 talents, what he is talking about is 200,000 years of debt that has been built up against this king. It is an impossible task. There's no way this guy could ever repay this debt that he owes the king. It's impossible. And everybody that heard the story would have known that. Verse 25 says, and since he could not pay, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment be made. And I love that Jesus includes the family here, because I don't think that's a mistake. And here's why. Because oftentimes when we sin, regardless of who it's against, we often hurt the people that are closest to us. We have a tendency when we sin against someone else, it's almost like collateral damage. We bring them down with us. And the people that are closest to us, our spouses, our children, our parents, our friends, they're the ones that feel it the most. They're the ones that are affected the most by us, the people that are closest to us. So he keeps going. Verse 26 says, so the servant fell on his knees, imploring him, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. No, he couldn't. We already talked about that. Verse 27, and out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. Underline that phrase, forgive him. That's our word. See, forgiving someone essentially is like canceling a debt. They have a debt that has been accrued against you, that they owe you. And when we forgive them, we're basically saying we're wiping that debt away. We're canceling that debt. That's the exact same kind of language in Colossians 2:14 when God says, God canceled our debt by nailing it to the cross. When Jesus went to the cross and died on the sins, he paid and canceled our debt that we have. Verse 28, but when the same servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. Now, 100 denarii is a good bit of money. It's about 4 months of a salary, but it's not insurmountable. Like you can manage that in some ways. He says, owed him 100 denarii, and seizing him, he began to choke him. So in other words, he started going all MMA on this guy, and he says, pay me what you owe. Verse 29, so his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him. And watch this. He uses the exact same language that the servant had just used with the king. He says, have patience with me, and I will pay you back. Ironically, this guy actually could. He only owed about 4 months' worth of wages. He could have paid the guy back. But watch how he responds. He says he refused and went and put him in prison until he could pay the debt. Reality is you're not paying a lot of debt if you're in prison. It says, when his fellow servants saw what had taken place, they were greatly distressed. Yeah, I mean, they're confused, right? Like, bro, you were just forgiven like $1 bazillion, a debt that you could never pay, and you're going to do this to your friend, this guy that owes you like a small amount? Like, it makes no sense. How come you're not forgiving this guy? It says they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Verse 32 says, then his master summoned him and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And look, if you take the words of Jesus very seriously, these next 2 verses should scare you because of what Jesus says right here. He wraps up the parable with this. He says, and in anger, his master delivered him to the jailers. That word jailers in the Greek means a tormentor or a torturer. It says he delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. And then here's this one single verse of commentary. That ends the parable. Jesus is going to give you just one line that wraps up this whole thing. He's going to put a big old bow on it. Here's what he says in verse 35. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother from your heart. Now, is he saying that when I forgive, that somehow that gives me credit with God and God's going to forgive me because I forgive other people? No, that's not what it's saying. We know that you cannot earn your salvation. It is a free gift that you get. But what it's saying is that my willingness to forgive others is evidence of the fact that I have been forgiven by God. That when we forgive, when we make that unilateral command decision to forgive others, it is evidence that God has forgiven us. But here's the thing. When we withhold forgiveness, when we refuse to cancel the debt that someone else owes us, we get like this gospel amnesia. You know what I'm saying? Like we forget that we too were once in need of forgiveness and that God freely, he did not withhold it at all. He freely forgave us of our sins. And now we are called to do the exact same thing. We are called to free the debt of other people because Jesus canceled our debt as well. Now, here's the part of the service that's going to get really uncomfortable for some of you guys. Here's the part where you're going to be like, I don't know if I like this. I've got a challenge for us this week because there's no way you could do this in the amount of time we have left. We have to learn to settle our accounts with people. We have to learn to settle those accounts. And I think there are 3 steps that we see in this passage that help us when it comes to settling our accounts. And so for you guys this morning, I'm going to encourage you to go out this week, and I want you to write it down. When we talk about these 3 steps, I want you to write it down because there is power in putting pen to paper and intentionality behind this. And that's the hard part. So here's the 3 things you've got to ask yourself. First one is this. You have to identify who has sinned against you. You need to identify who that person is. For some of you guys, that's going to be real easy. The minute I started mentioning forgiveness, you were like, Tammy, okay, we'll write Tammy's name down. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead and write that down. Put that down. But some of the other ones are going to be kind of difficult. Maybe it's an ex. Maybe it's a parent. And you know that the Bible tells us we're supposed to honor our parents. But maybe there's some things that you need to cancel the debt with your parents. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's that friend that you told some very private things in confidence, and you showed up to work on Monday morning, and all of a sudden everybody knows. They betrayed your trust. Maybe it's a child. And look, we have a lot of difficulty because we don't really think that our children owe us anything. But if you've got a prodigal child, And you've probably got some hurt there that you got to deal with. You got some things, some debt that's built up. Maybe this morning, the name that you need to write down is your own name. Maybe you are your own worst enemy. Maybe you sabotage every single relationship and everything that you do. And you hold your worst criticism and your worst offenses for yourself. So maybe the name this morning you got to write down is your own name. So that's the first one. We've got to identify the people who have sinned against us. Write them down. Second step is this. You have to identify what they owe you or what they have taken from you. You have to acknowledge it. We have to be very specific here in identifying this. And look, this is going to be very difficult for some of you people. It will be extremely difficult because you have spent a lifetime of pushing that away and pushing it down and covering it up and pretending like it's not happened. That happened so long ago. I don't want to bring that up again. I'm just going to minimize it. I'm going to pretend like it didn't happen. I'm going to push it down and avoid it. You're like, why in the world, Michael, would I want to bring that stuff up again? All it's going to do is rehash the pain that I went through so long ago. And yeah, some of that stuff is going to be painful for us. I get that. But here's the thing. If you had a broken arm and you went to the doctor, what's the first thing that doctor's going to do? It's going to reach out for that broken arm and maybe have to reset it. You're like, not this arm. Here, use this arm. Like, no, that's the arm that's hurt. This is the arm we got to take care of. So sometimes healing in the beginning feels like pain. Sometimes when we are going through the healing process, it takes us walking through just a little bit of pain. And for some of us, man, I get it. Like, we got some deep scars. But you got to understand, man, Jesus is not afraid of your scars. He's not. In fact, our scars are evidence of our healing. The scars that we have in our lives are evidence of our past. Our scars are part of our story, but check this out. Here it is. They don't define us. In fact, Jesus has scars too. His scars actually define us, not our scars. So we have to be willing to take the time to figure out exactly what that person owes us, what they did against us. And the last thing I got is this. Third one is this. Once you've identified who has sinned against you and you've identified what they owe, you got to identify what feelings are associated with their actions. Have they left you feeling hopeless, betrayed, helpless, devalued? Like, all of these things, they're coming up. You got to write them down and put them with a name. And here's what's going to happen, guys, if you do this. If you take the time to do this extremely difficult work this week, here's what you're going to end up with. Do you know what you've just written down? It's a debt ledger. That's what you have. You have a debt ledger. You know what a debt ledger is? Like, if you go to the bank because you want to get the mortgage for a house, what they're going to do is they're going to give you a little piece of paper, and it's going to tell exactly what you owe the bank, right? And that's exactly what you have in this debt ledger. You have a list of all the grievances, all the things that other people owe you because of the sin that they have perpetrated against you. And when you do that, you got two options. You got two options of what you can do with that debt ledger. You can hold on to it. Now, I'm going to encourage you not to do that. But if you are, just own it. Like, seriously, if you're just going to hold on to it and you're going to withhold forgiveness for those people, dude, just print it out and put it in prominent places. Put it on your mirror, put it in your car, so that everywhere you go, you see it. It's right there. It's right in your face. And here's why I'm going to encourage you not to do that. Because all that's going to happen when you hold on to the forgiveness, you withhold forgiveness of the people around you, it turns into bitterness. It turns into all of these negative feelings that you have on your side, and it eats away at you. So you can hold on to it. The other option is this. You can cancel the debt. You can cancel the debt. You can wad it up and throw it in the trash. You can rip it up. You can set it on fire, collect the ashes and scatter them wherever you want to. I heard a story about a woman one time. She had gone through some unbelievable pain. It was from her parents. And she finally got to a place where she was going to forgive them. And she did this. She wrote it down. And you know what she did? She took the ashes. She burned it up. She took the ashes and put them in an urn and then just set it over to remind her that she had set that free, that she had released that debt. So whatever symbolic thing you got to do, whether it's just simply throwing it in the trash or scattering it or doing whatever you want to do with it, man, will you just cancel that debt? Will you just let it go? Because we have been forgiven. we are now called to forgive others. Let me pray for us this morning.